This is Willpower.
So welcome to our SHERPA Pro call that we've actually just opened up to everyone in the SHERPA community and public even, if anyone wanted to come and join. We sent out some emails to additional people to talk about women in cold. It's a very exciting time because there's so much conversation around females and cold exposure and podcasts and fodder on social media and all this beautiful energy. So I want to get clear around a couple of things. I wanted to speak specifically to Lena. Lena and I are going to have a conversation today, but this is really an open forum for, I always want men to come to these calls and then we don't get a lot of them, but it's a really big and important open forum for us to have this conversation around how we coach to context of females and what's going on and what we're all seeing online. So please letting this be an open dialogue for us all so that we can rise together, so that we can continue to work with the clients and facilitate the most amazing and remarkable experiences possible, both within the SHERPA Breath and Cold community, as well as beyond in all of your businesses. So let me see. I'm going to make Lena the co-host. So Kristen and Jenny and Claire and Jill and Stacy and Mandy are here. If anyone else jumps in, amazing. We're recording this. We will share it out with a broader audience. So just I'd say that from a safety and consent perspective, everything that we talk about here, you should feel comfortable to have anyone else in the SHERPA community and potentially beyond that listening in. And I think it's also at the same time all right to say that we can speak about some of the discourse that is online, some of the conversation and some of the voices, right? Albeit, male or female or what have you. So there's lots of voices online speaking. So let's just kick off the initial thing with what has transpired in the last week or so, is there was a Mel Robbins and Dr. Stacy Sims on the coming in now. Someone try to people in. Dr. Stacy Sims, and is everyone in?
I'll keep track of it. You're good.
Okay.
I can see him too. I'm letting people in.
Great. Dr. Stacy Sims and Mel Robbins. Mel Robbins podcast, massive, right? Tens of millions of downloads. And they had a conversation about cold exposure, which has been going on for a very long time. But it was super popularized because of Mel Robbins' reach. And the conversation with her and Stacy Sims specifically was a sound snippet, a sound bite that was Stacy Sims talking about how women should do warmer temp, and Mel Robbins responding and saying, "Oh, thank God. I don't have to do cold exposure as cold or as often," or et cetera, et cetera. So since there's been some beautiful on all directions conversation, discourse online, there have been some, I don't know if I'd say rebuttals, but Huberman did a 6-minute retort to conversationalize it and contextualize it in some ways around the science. And Dr. Thomas Seager did a little ice bath thing, which was weaving in the Andrew Huberman 6-minute push on information. And I'm not quite sure he said massively anything in addition to what Huberman said, but did speak specifically to components of what he's seen, and some things about pre-training and pre-cooling that were just, layered into the mix across the board. Today, I want to focus predominantly on the conversation around women in cold, females in cold, and also just a reiteration for those of you who don't know, the Willpower podcast, which is the podcast I host. I interviewed Stacy Sims about a year ago, maybe 9 months ago. And we did cover some of these things, right? My reach is much smaller than Mel's is right now. And so there are some good nuggets as well that have come out of that podcast. And then the other thing I want to just put on the table for all of this is that I have been following Stacy Sims for over 10 years. I have been and done and gone through some of her online programs. I feel like she is a vision and a voice in
respect, and we help.
A vision and a voice around I hear Huberman, a vision and a voice around females when it comes to training and perimenopause and menopause, fitness, triathlons, cold exposure, understanding so much around the female physiology and working with women at a deep level, not just as a coach, but as a researcher. So I want to give kudos and pay homage to where her work has been born and how she's led so many people from the first book she put out, which was called Roar, to this day with the information that she gives in her work, and also in a very many settings where it's just no cost education. So want to shout her out for sure. And there's, again, everyone will have a lot of opinions about the things that she says. This spread far and wide. I had a call with a company in Australia who is 2 leaders, the Art of Breath, to have this conversation for their cohort, and wanted to make sure we could highlight it in our, not just our cohort, but across the entire Sherpa landscape. And it all builds back to context, right? Context is king and safety is queen, like we speak about. So we didn't prepare anything super formal. We want to have some conversation around it. And maybe Lena, you want to speak your voice into the room a bit about the things you've seen, the things you and I have shared, and what else, what are some key critical points that you think came up in this back and forth?
Yeah, 100%. I also want to add that Susanna Soberg has been really active on Instagram as well, putting her voice into the space, talking about the myth of cortisol staying elevated every time you plunge, and that some of the studies that have been pulled up aren't necessarily fair, in that some of them are cold water swimming based, where some women were in cold water for like up to 3 hours, which is a completely different story than 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. I think one thing that I've seen as soon as this started going viral was a lot of the women. So I saw, and I'm sure many of you are here because you've had the same experience. You have your contingent of friends, potential clients, and people that are afraid of the cold, have no interest in the cold, popping this into your DMs, being like, see, I told you this wasn't for me. And then those that are like, this has been life-changing for me. I feel like such a better, more well-rounded person for X amount of reasons because I've been cold plunging. Am I wrong? Is this wrong now to do? And so I think that the reason that the sound bite, then that's one thing to really be aware of, is that it's a sound bite. It's a moment in time taken out of context to some extent, that also has created this over the last 3 weeks of tribes forming and pros, cons, all the thing. And the beautiful thing for us is that it opens up discussion. At this point in my career, plunging women, which has been hundreds at this point, I actually have witnessed and seen that women tolerate the cold better than the men that I have plunged personally. And we have so many beautiful stories, even just within our Sherpa community, of increasing mental resilience, coming back to yourself, moving out of more stages of flight, fight, and freeze, just shocking yourself back to yourself. The entire communities plunging together. And I think that the piece that Kristen and I kind of discussed early on was the thing that we continue to beat the drum on at Sherpa Breath and Cold, which is context. It all matters. Of course, if you've got somebody who is plunging for their very first time, has no preconceived understanding of what they're doing, what it's going to feel like, and they're doing it on their own, I'd say 9 times out of 10, that's a negative experience. And that I get a lot of those people coming through my door eventually where they're like, oh, no, I did 30 seconds in a spa in Mexico and it was terrible and I'll never do it again. But when you guide somebody through that experience, when you look somebody in the eye, when you help them find their breath, it's a completely different experience. And I think that that's something that we continue to really harp is the wrong word, but harp on it at Sherpa Breath and Cold, is that we're here not to focus on the outcome, but to guide people through the process. And with all of the pop-ups of thermal contrast spas and tubs available everywhere and gyms just putting them in the corner in some space thinking people are going to use them, the experience is such an important piece of the equation. And when we disregard that and just say, yeah, just throw yourself into a body of cold water, you'll be fine, especially if it's your first time, the odds of it being a positive experience is little to none. And I even share with my clients, my first plunge experience, my first true plunge experience, pre-SHERPA breath and cold, which was really the impetus for me to go and get trained. I got into the water and instantly started weeping and cackling like a hyena at the same time. It was just like emotional vomit coming out of me. And my husband looked at me terrified, and he stopped the recording and he deleted it. And he was like, what was that? And if that's it, if that's your experience and that's it, anybody do that to themselves again. And then when you get that validation that it was too much or not for women and all of these things, it's easy then to discount it all. And that's really just such a small part of the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, amen to that for sure. I think there's so lot to unpack there too. I mean, just speaking about.
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Hi, if you guys are in the room, we love you that you're here. Will you just put yourselves on mute if you're not chatting in on the combo? Thank you. Also, if you have things that are coming up while Lena and I are having this conversation, please, everyone who's here, throw it in the chat so we can answer these questions. Shout out to Chris Chukri, who's bringing the male energy vibes into the space, all the way up from Manitoba. And so like Lena's speaking about specifically, I think if we go back to the 10,000 foot view of what's happening right now, the conversations that are happening, which the good news is it's so beautiful to have these conversations, as Lena said. The other piece is what we don't want to be doing is turning off any humans from these practices who have not tried them before, right? So how do we keep people into the fold and make sure that there's a level of comfort and safety? And a lot of this is really around what Lena just spoke about. These are tenets, these things that are coming up and reasons why we want to encourage people, especially in the early days of cold plunging, to work with a coach. And perhaps, like we speak about at SHERPA Breath and Cold, this is why you want to work with a coach consistently in an 8-week program, et cetera, working on different breath work and nervous system navigation, because what we are essentially doing as coaches, leaders, and facilitators in this space, whether it's with our own bodies or clients, is we are DJing our nervous system, right? We are building arousal flexibility so that we can give a deliberate dose of stress to the body and then rescind it and then feel into it and see how it went, and it will make us better at life, right? So when we have all these conversations, and we should start to unpack some of the details, I think, like time and temperature and all of that. We're having these conversations. The thing we don't want to do is turn people off. And the thing I think was hard for me to hear personally was Mel's response to the conversation, to what Stacey said, like, oh, thank goodness I don't have to, because we know that it can land with many people like, I don't like the cold. And the reality is that our nervous system is going to respond strongly and intensely to an exposure of cold that feels like a dose of stress. And that, thank goodness, is the most beautiful thing about our nervous system, is that she or he or they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that just gives us, we should first have grace with that and then say, okay, cool, what is the intention that I have here, right? We call it SHERPA Breath and Cold, we call cold exposure, we talk about ICE, intentional cold exposure. So it's not just deliberate, but it's like, what's the intention behind what I'm doing, right? And so if we started time and temperature, I think that's the first conversation to have. And I'd like to open it by just saying that there is a notion and some conversation I've had around the Stacey Sims piece that when she was on my podcast, she talked about 55 degrees being the sweet spot. And also that's where she is working in some capacity with people training for triathlons, and that if that open water is 55 degrees and you train in it, you can actually adapt enough to the cold that you are not slowing your heart rate as much when you are in a race, because you want to be able to get your PR, swim quickly, do all the things, not get muzzy headed, right? So most of you who I know on this call have been in cold water and put your face or head underneath. I don't know every single one of you, but most of you. We've done this, so we know we can get a little muzzy headed. The mammalian dive reflex or mammalian dive response from your cheeks and your neck getting into the water, it will slow your heart rate naturally. This is a beautiful reason why people in an ice tub or plunging or even in a cold ice hole can feel safe and can feel re-regulating in that cold experience, because their heart rate is slowing down. And the context is that we and they hopefully want to be in the cold water for a certain period of time, and they're learning how to regulate themselves while in an experience of heightened stress. And when a person is swimming, I'm not a triathlete, so, take that for what it's worth. But when a person's swimming in a race and you are working with people like that in the client space, they don't necessarily want to get muzzy headed and slow down way too much. So a warmer temp is going to be potentially what they're swimming in. And then if you're training at that warmer temp, you're then adapting to that temp in the 50, 55 degree range. And then perhaps you can swim a bit better, be used to the cold and not have that, they call it the human blender when everybody gets in the open water swim for the triathlon community. It's like getting through the stress of the human blender of everyone getting in at once and kicking and paddling and swimming and being able to have the endurance to get to the finish of the swim. That feels like something like you're going to have to deal with the temperature of what the water is, right? Maybe it's not an issue if it's 70 degrees, but if it's going to be cold, which quite often it is, then we want to be adapted to that. So I think that there is something about the lens with which the person is speaking from and through that contributes to potentially a bias. Like that's not, Stacey's only piece. She talks about women, physiology, estrogen, body fat tissue, all the things that we want to think about for females. But Lena and all of you that are here, we've seen a lot of argumentative responses on social around what's the problem with the temp being lower. So let's open that question and let's have some conversation around your thoughts on the temp being, as low as we can get it to freezing for females, Lena.
Yeah. I like to play with temp. I think that temperature is not the only consideration when it comes to the feeling of the temperature. Circulation also matters as well. So, as an example, when I travel around with my trough and you put ice in, you can get pretty close to like 36 degrees easily. With my tub that circulates here at home, oftentimes for first-time plungers, the people who I know who have more sensitive nervous systems, I'll bump the temperature of my circulating tub here up to 45 because I know that the water is moving and there isn't as much of a thermal barrier to play with. And again, temperature comes with context as well when it comes to the female body. When we are in our luteal phase, we are more sensitive to the cold. I think it's a beautiful check-in for me. I know exactly where I'm at in my cycle when I plunge, when the same temperature feels colder than it does on a different day. And part of the experience of plunging, context matters. And as you mentioned, intention matters. There are so many benefits to cold plunging and cold immersion therapies, aside from delayed onset muscle soreness, aside there's immunity building, there's mental resilience, there is the conversion over time of white fat to beige and brown fat. There is a deep sense of presence. We had a beautiful presentation from Jeremiah at SHERPA in the Wild this past February about just the healing properties of water in general, the ability to ritualize that experience as well. And so depending on what your aim is, that's also going to change the time and the temp. And being able to tune into yourself, being guided to learn how to parse through that inner voice of what is resistance and what is my body telling me I'm done. And being able to fine tune that, I think is really important. And boiling it down to a single temperature, saying that like 55 degrees is the temp. That in my head, I think that's a little oversimplistic. What I know is that most of the cold water immersion research is done sub 50. And so there's a lot of learning that we have and what happens in the physiology under 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But I don't think there is a single time or a single temp that we need to be operating at for every single person.
Yeah. And the thing that's interesting is the exciting part is I developed the protocol for this veteran cold plunging research they're doing right now out of Florida. The Gray team, the guy who runs it is coming on the podcast in a couple of weeks. And in science, in research, you have to pick. You have to pick for the research. You either have to say it's wild swimming and here's the range of temperatures that we check the temp every day and it's here. I'm also surprised sometimes, and Lena's seen this too, that there's research that doesn't say what the temperature is of the cold water. And you're like, how can you leave that part out? But, the wild swimming may track what the temperature is. Susanna Soberg's research does a lot of that every day. What's the temp of the water? And most research is tracking temp, and time is another variable. And when you're doing research that's clean, the protocol has to be what the protocol is because everyone has to go through it. I also, for this protocol, and just to really speak to research specifically, I gave them 10 things that the person could say who was facilitating, because it was someone sitting with them, but they weren't coaching. And I gave them 10 things they could say that were really around safety and a little smidge of breathing, just like one piece of information that they could do with their breath, not to put any more variables in the research. Of course, I want to give them a ton of breath protocols and long through the nose and feel your belly. And no, because it puts too many variables in the research, right? So it was like 10 things that every time they go in, they were going to get, these 10 things read to them basically before they got in or as they were stepping into the tub. And that's it. And so it has to be very clean and clear. There's a question here from Amanda. Thanks for asking this. Is it the same for perimenopause and menopause? I'm assuming what you were asking about, Amanda, was temperature and the most challenging time of the month in females with the reproductive, in the reproductive years. The most challenging time tends to be, we see, when we are more sensitive, when we are less connected to our pelvic floor. We are less connected to our pelvic floor because days like 18 to 22, I have to keep looking up the exact dates from Patrick McEwen, but 18 to 22, we have a lower propensity to uptake oxygen because of the progesterone rise. And it tends to be that those 5 or so days before our period are our most sensitive. We've gotten less sleep and we're less connected to our pelvic floor. Again, generally speaking, it's not going to mean every single woman, doesn't necessarily mean you can or can't plunge then. But knowing that that is a more sensitive time could be a time that you might coach a client to not go in or to go in at a higher temp and to go in for a shorter time. The question towards perimenopause and menopause, if I, in my computer somewhere, if I tried to find it, it would take me a minute, but there's a chart of what it looks like when you're not on any types of birth control whatsoever, and it's a standard reproductive year cycle for a woman. Standard is a very loose term because, as Lauren Colenso-Semple, who's another researcher who researches on women, muscle growth and things like that, she has women come into the lab every day to take bloods because what she sees is that some women menstruate 2 days, some 5, some ovulate 2 hours, some 36. Some people have a 22-day cycle. Some have a 30-day cycle. Every month it changes. So we need to recognize women are so variable, and this is the beauty and the superpower of our bodies. And also we are variable when it comes to stress. This is why athletes sometimes, or high stress conditions, can have us skip a period. But all in, when you look at that chart, we can get a general feeling of the flow of a monthly cycle and hormonal profile for a woman. And when you look at what they would put down as a monthly cycle for someone who's on oral contraceptive, it looks very different. The highs are not highs and the lows are not lows. There are pulses every day when you take the pill for the uptake of the pill, and then as it begins to fall in the body, and they're just small pulses. So it's falsifying a system. So this is the other challenge in this, is that yes, we know what happens and when we're most sensitive, and even in a oral contraceptive environment, we're going to have some ebbs and flows that are similar. And not to get too much in the weeds here, but when you look at a chart beyond that and you look at perimenopausal women and menopausal women being 1 year with no menses, 1 year of not bleeding is then menopausal. Hormones are all over the place. Like there's no way for actually someone to even map a perimenopausal woman's cycle, because the latest theory, and case that's being made from a woman, Virginia, out of New Zealand, is that we are actually, when we are as females in perimenopausal states, we are having potentially up to 2 full cycles in 4 weeks. So that we're having 2 ebbs and flows. We may or may not be bleeding. An egg may or may not be dropping at each time, and they may just decide to get partially through one and then fall off to the other into the second sort of cycle. And then there are plenty of people that maybe that's not happening at all, right? So it is definitely all over the place. Perimenopausal women are going to have more. So let's blow this out, right? Because it's how can you do that? How can you talk about that with a client besides what you know, because you're not blood testing them, I imagine. When perimenopausal women are having lots of symptoms for up to 20 years, and a lot of those symptoms are going to be mental, emotional. And it's a beautiful time of life because the brain is rewiring, the adrenals are taking over. Adrenals having some correlation to cortisol. We spoke earlier about the notion of cortisol, and Tom Seager speaks about this at length in a 3-hour episode with Luke Story on cold exposure, which I'm happy to share or just tell you guys you should check out. And the reality is cortisol is modulated in the ice bath, right? So the ice bath helps modulate cortisol, which means it's going to potentially rise a little, or it could fall a little, but what it's working to do as we get cellular optimization by doing CWI, cold water immersion, deliberate cold exposure, et cetera, is attempting to re-regulate you. It's attempting to modulate cortisol. So again, every body is going to be bio-individual, but when we're navigating cortisol, perimenopause, menopause, adrenals, emotional, mental, this is the category that's the biggest miss across the board for women, if we're speaking about female physiology, but for every human being. The category that's the biggest miss about cold exposure, and I will continue to beat the drum more and more on, is mental health advocacy. I've said this before, I kind of don't give a shit about all the science when I know that I can keep someone happier, healthier, potentially, not my words, people have said this practice has saved my life because they can get a bliss chemical cascade, they can re-regulate or modulate what's happening in the body. And I don't know about how much y'all know about perimenopause and menopause, but these years, when you look on record, there's some research that points to the fact that the highest window of time that women commit suicide are in these years. So it is something that, again, is being talked about and spoken about more and more, but we cannot turn our heads away from the fact that cold exposure and breath work, and sauna for that matter, but specifically cold and breath, they are modalities that can change the game for females who are upside down because of these things. Change the game for people who are not willing to do HRT, right? I have an opinion on HRT. I don't need to share it. You can do it or not. That's hormone replacement therapy. So I am a strong advocate for mental health for anybody, any age, any stage. And also, I would never tell someone not to do this practice if they were really struggling when it came to mental, emotional, or potentially physical symptoms from being in the perimenopausal or menopausal years, especially women in hot flashes. They're like, get me in the freaking cold. So I say this on a soapbox because I think we need to be banging the drum as females, and Chris and everyone who's on this call. I think it's important to share with the people that we know that there is a piece of this. We know we get norepinephrine and epinephrine. So that's adrenaline, noradrenaline, same, different, two different scientific bodies, same terms. We know we get a big punch of dopamine. Studies have shown 250+%. We know we get a metabolic boost up to 36 hours. So if you're doing this 3 times a week, you're keeping your metabolism fired, and that's also helping at a cellular level. We know these benefits that come with these practices. So I want to, emphasize that because I dealing with some hormonal fall off on my own. I have clients all the time that are showing up and there's either like rage or sadness or depression, all of those things. Anxiety can just come on for people who have never experienced those things before. So cold can be really beautiful in that regard. And it's not that males don't have, aren't at the affect of these challenges or these diagnoses or these issues that come up emotionally. It's just that today we're really speaking about women, and men, although they go through andropause, it's a very different. So Thank you, Amanda. That's a great question and something I really like to address when it comes to mental health for females specifically. And I love everything you said about temperature, Lena, like understanding. There was a conversation. Did you hear the conversation that Thomas Seager was talking about a bit, like, hey, it's also about adaptation. It's also about
100%.
Are you want to speak a little to kind of what you grokked and got from that summary?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as all of us, I think here, I'm going to make a generalization, are practitioners of the cold, have experienced it. Think back to your very first cold plunge experience and how different of an experience that very first time is, or when you plunge somebody for the first time versus the subsequent times. And of course, there's ones that are spicier than other times, depending on how you're doing and all of the things. But one of the things that if this is a practice that you are doing regularly, you adapt to the cold. That's part of the conversion of our white fat to beige and brown fat. Your first time through the cold, you might have had a big shiver response or a bigger after drop that happened. And then from there, we have to do things as we adapt. The same with strength training, right? Like the harder you work with the same weight, the lighter it feels. And then we have to play with different variables to elicit another stress response. It's what we talk about here as minimum effective dose of stress. And the more we expose ourselves to those stresses and give ourselves the opportunity to recover from those stresses, the more we adapt to them. Something that I noticed in myself is when I am very consistent with my cold plunge practice, my hands and feet throughout the day don't get as cold. If I fall off of my usual routine, I instantly, when I get outside, I will feel my hands being colder, my feet being colder. So taking the time to adapt to the cold, me plunging a client for the very first time at 40 degrees is going to be a different experience than me plunging for the third time this week at 40 degrees. And that nuance is important. And to just zoom out a little bit further, going back to what Kristen was talking about with hormonal fluctuations, that's a huge reason why women are underrepresented in research, because there is so many variables to consider that are also bio-individual in there that it's hard to control for those variables in studies. And so historically, it's just so much easier to have 24-year-old men in our studies because there's so fewer variables in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And this too, I mean, a lot of what we're speaking about is like, we think we can temp down as we want to, but even when Amanda was speaking specifically about ranges and playing ranges, there's nothing wrong with someone whose first time wants to try at a higher temp, where I'm doing breath, cold and sauna ritual at this place called KION here in Austin. They have 3 tubs. It's like 40, 45 degrees. And the other one is typically like 53. And so people can kind of pick their poison and create adaptation in that way, right? Because someone will say, I'm going to do 3 minutes today, but I'm not ready to do 3 minutes and 40. I used to only do 2, or I used to only do 3, and I want to do another 30 seconds or a minute or whatever they're up to be able to adapt better. And they'll start in the 53. And they will also feel more successful in the 53, most likely, right? And so we teach and speak and educate a lot about the number one thing we want a client or someone we're working with, whether it's a community member or a friend, to get or feel when they are in the cold plunges. We want them to feel successful so that they can come back and try the practices again. Because as we all know, it's wonderful to get your little Instagram shot off. But if that's the only time you ever get in the cold, the benefits are so fractional to having a consistent practice that we just don't get the shifts in the longevity and the long-term health that we want. So note that this is about playing ranges. And it's like, I wouldn't plunge anybody much higher than 55 degrees. But if you're in like wild water and it's 58, maybe you stay in a little longer. Maybe that's just like where you're at for that day. And I think that that's the important thing to remember. I think also, what I get asked this question a lot for males and females, but specifically the women that I'm working with, like when do I know enough is enough, or when is too much for my body? There's 2 things too that bubble up with that, which is women don't want to plunge on their period. There isn't a ton of research that shows any negative effects of that, although the traditional Chinese medicine community has some feedback on their thoughts, thinking cold is not optimal. Carrie Bacon and I, Carrie's one of our SHERPA master trainers in training. She and I had a conversation on a podcast episode to talk about that because she's a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. And then women feeling like, what's the best way for me to sort of navigate what I do for my own practice, for my own time, for my own temperature. And so I think the conversation that comes up about which tub, which time, which temp is really about, or what's too much for me to do, is we want to titrate the dose of stress so that we step out of the cold, whether it's a cold body of water or an ice tub, knowing that ice tub is probably more contained in its environment, and a cold body of water is going to be like, let's not push our edges because we have a 100-meter walk to the house or the car or whatever it might be, or maybe you're lucky enough to have a sauna. But what's too much is the only way you can kind of create the barometer for that is you want to be able to get in, you want to be able to navigate through the cold experience, you want to be able to get out safely and feel like you're not completely disassociated, or your client is. Then you want to have, within a minute or so, have some sort of shiver response. Right? A slight shiver response, which is a microcontraction of the muscles that are helping with the thermogenic response for you to heat the body up. And that shiver response is where the poison is in the dose, right? The dose can, if it's so much and you shiver for 20 minutes, that's too much. If you have a small shiver and it's manageable and you're just standing still, or your shiver's a little bit medium to large size and you do a few horse stances, thank you, Wim, or you do cartwheels, or you do jumping jacks or run in place, all that's fine. You're like kind of blunting the the response to your body to warm up on its own, but sometimes we're cold and we want to jump up and down. So going through all of that so that you know, okay, I have this shiver response that lasted about a minute. I had someone get in the cold last week that's like, oh, I don't always have a shiver response. Today I didn't. Now that could be a female who's in a different part of her cycle. It could be any human being who's in a different arena of stress, right? Your allostatic load, the type of stress that you have, is going to conduct whether you're too stressed or not stressed, or maybe perhaps if you shiver or if you don't, because you're already navigating a lot in your life. And then the third thing is like, or the next thing is just like getting to that 1 minute or so mark. And do you need to go colder? Do you need to go longer? This is a gamification. We want to play with these variables and say, okay, how can I make myself feel like I've gotten a good, deliberate, intentional dose of stress today that is featuring or focused around my context as a human being. And some days that's just like, you know, a girlfriend of mine who I isn't a SHERPA, but you know, you guys might know her. She was like going through a whole bunch of stuff, and she's like, did like 3 head dunks and a 3-minute cold plunge, and in the last head dunk, I just sort of like put my face underwater and gave a big like primal scream, and that's her protocol for that day because she needed to get out some emotionality that she felt. This is like punching your pillow, where it was safe for her to do so and not going to be all wildly off-putting to someone she walk out in the street and scream, you know, primal scream in the world. So people are layering in things as they need, whether that be head dunking or face plunging or any of those pieces. And women specifically, I think we want to both encourage ourselves in our own practice, because we all should have our own practice, not to should on us, but we should all be plunging if we're leading this at least a couple times a week. Doesn't mean you can't take some time off from time to time. And then how we work with female clients, giving them a bit of the divining rod by the intake process that you're working with them, talking to them about if they rock up on you and you know they've done cold before, you better find out what their current practice is so you can parse what's going to work for them. This is what like Mandy, who's on this call, and I just did, and Lena and I have done it, and so many people have been, if y'all have been through a SHERPA training, you've seen it, hopefully, is what's the game when we bring the volunteers in or we just cross coach each other is the game is what's your current practice and how do I titrate the dose of stress? We had plenty of people. We had 2 people in Nova Scotia that were like, I've never done a head dunk. And that was real for them. We cross coached each other because we were in the middle of God's country in quirky Nova Scotia, head of J'adore. But we had 2 people that were like, I've never done a head dunk. And even though they're playing the student, that's real for them. And both of those people, one of the guys came running in and did a cannonball, fully in character, but a cannonball with a head dunk in it. And he had never done that before. And it was like encouraging to say, how do we play with our edges and what did that feel like? And for him, that felt like the most fun. Of course, we have to be safe when we do that, but it was unexpected. But the most fun and playful way for him to be able to not have to be like, oh my God, I'm going to go now underneath the water. Okay. And then he just cannonballed into the plunge and put his head under. And it was a big win. I think we made him do 3 head dunks, I think, Mandy, by the end of it. But leaning into the ways we can titrate the dose of stress just a bit up for the client that we're working with. And that includes women, right? We had a lot of conversation, and I think we should have some conversation. You know, far be it from me to say what anyone should do with their body. That's the first thing I want to say. Everybody has agency to be able to choose what they want for their own body. That includes like, you want to go in an ice bath for 30 seconds only. You don't want to go in. You want to shoot heroin. You want to, you know, run 100K until your toes bleed. Like whatever you're into for your sport, your context in your life, it's all fine. Like, I don't really want you to shoot heroin, but you know, whatever you're into. So do what you want with your body. And that being said, let's make sure that we're giving suggestions that are powerful and not painful or problematic to the people that we're working with, right? Minimum effective dose of stress can become relatively quickly point of diminishing returns and actually have a negative effect on the body or the mind, right? Think about someone who makes 3 minutes and you push them too hard to go to 4 and they don't get to 4, they get out at 3:30. Well, they've already won, been successful. Maybe they head down 3:30 is amazing. It's a new PR for them. And then they feel like shit because they didn't get to this 4-minute mark that you put down. So it's really about how do we play with these variables in a way that are feeling safe and happy. And, you know, I don't advocate as a coach putting someone in for 20 minutes. And the other piece I'm alluding to here is there's a conversation and there's lots of people who are plunging pregnant and there are lots of people who don't plunge pregnant and people say it's a contraindication. And this is quite a female topic, obviously. And so if I'm of the mindset that if someone shows up to my event and they are pregnant and they've signed a liability waiver and all the things, I'm probably still not going to, I'm going to ask them to help me, to do other things, to breathe, but I'm going to ask that they don't do cold plunging on my watch. Now, have I been at community events where they're pregnant women who have a cold plunging practice and I'm helping guide and I'm like, hey, I'm going to be there and someone's choosing to go in on their own and they haven't specifically paid me and I will sit with them and coach breath or something? Sure. And plenty of women who have had cold plunging practices for thousands of years. This is not just the onset of, cold plunge on Instagram. For thousands of years have been pregnant, pre, intra, and post-pregnancy have plunged with no problems. But I really believe with females, the other thing to mention is that it's really getting more and more challenging to get pregnant these days with environmental factors and stress and toxins and lack of fertility. If a couple is really spending a lot of money or taking a lot of time to get pregnant, then why would we take the risk that something could happen? That's my question, just to pose to the person who is thinking about that. Do you have anything you want to add to the pregnancy topic or the your body, your choice topic, Lena?
Oh, 100%. The other thing that we talk about with pregnancy and with other contraindications like hypertension or syncopes of any kind is there's ways we can play with cold that aren't also full immersion. I've had a couple of pregnant gals at events and we face plunge them or we let them put their arms in or stand in the tub. And that feels so good on your feet, especially when you're further along. So there's a lot of ways that we can play with the cold. Again, it's that minimum effective dose of stress and what's right for the individual. And at least for me as a coach, number one for me is to do no harm. And the second is for my clients to feel successful in what they're doing and feel safe and able to listen to their own voice as well. And I think that doesn't necessarily come with a certain time, temp, or experience. I have plenty of clients who are obsessed with face plunging because that is the maximum of what they are able to do right now with POTS and other things that they have going on where a full body immersion is not for them, but getting that dose in their face right away has been game changing for brain fog and for energy and for that feeling that so many of us get when we do get all the way in up to the neck or all the way under. And so that's one piece that I want to add in there is that it can look a little bit different and it can be super cold or it can be not super cold. And I also just want to reiterate the fact that, yes, we are doing this intentionally with tech right now, with chillers that keep things cold. We've got stopwatches. We've got our phones set on tripods on Instagram doing time lapses and all of that. But this is an ancient practice. If you've gone through SHERPA level 1, you have gone through the history of cold, and it is present in almost every indigenous culture across the globe for thousands of years, without white papers, without photo documentation or videos being taken, and it's been around.
Yeah, and without and mindfully that if people were spending long periods of time under cold water, it wasn't, to compete with each other. It was probably to catch fish or survive and thrive or be the breadwinner, if you will, for their tribe or their culture, their community. And this is something that's come up on some of the pieces in general or on cold for females or males. It's also just how much time are you putting your brain under cold water, right? Our brain is not so far inside of our skull, and how muzzy do we want to make ourselves, right? What's the tolerance that our brain and body has for long-term head dunks, right? I'm not saying you can't do 30 seconds, you can't, which is a long time. And also there are plenty of people that we see that are swimming from end to end and doing things competitively, which all are fine. But there are other people that are just playing the landscape of, let me get a straw, let me get underwater. I don't know which one of the things I just watched about the people who are using a snorkel to have a competition of who can stay under the water longest, cold. And it just reaches a point where it's like Darwin's law. It's like, I just am not, a big advocate of that. I get that games people will play, but Just noting that as well. I think if you're choosing to head dunk with a woman, and I don't mean like if they're pregnant and you're just face plunging them or you put their head in, or when we were in San Diego, we had a woman that was like, we happened to have a cold shower right there for the rinse shower post sauna. And it was like, great, you can do a cold shower. And in some cases that cold shower can be titillating and tingling, but it's most likely not going to have any setbacks or challenges for a woman who's pregnant to be in a cold shower. So yeah, thanks for adding all of that. That's really great context and additional ways that we can play with females who are, like you said, or anyone who's got a contraindication. And we've all seen, and I think many of us on this call have also seen, the Raynaud's conversation comes up, and there's some great stuff we've talked about in the SHERPA Pro portal that some of you have access to around mitigating symptoms, sometimes all symptoms for people who have been diagnosed with Raynaud's. And also Raynaud's was for many, many, many years, and still by many Western doctors is a big, like, they're like cold is a no-no, but we're seeing a bit differently with autoimmune and Raynaud's and things like that within the agency of the person who's diagnosed to choose to do cold. So epic. We are.
Yeah, sorry, I want to add one more thing is that you kind of hit it on the head with like the snorkel example is, and I say this to clients all the time too, when it comes to strength training. The devil is in the dose, and understanding the difference between sport and therapy, longevity, benefit. The more you lean into sport, the more risk there is. That's not to say that you shouldn't do it, but the sometimes the higher the reward, the more the risk. So the question is, again, why are you doing this thing? What are you trying to accomplish? And understanding that there's a difference between therapy and therapeutic execution of modalities, and then turning it into a sport or competition. Like if you want to make the Guinness Book of World Records for sitting in ice blocks for, I think it's over like 4 hours now at this point, that's a completely different animal than somebody who wants to develop a cold practice 2 to 3 times a week.
Yeah. And we see the guy who sits in cold ice cubes for hours and hours and hours on end, like ridiculously, like a Wim Hof vibe in some ways, sort of, I think, a bit of a disciple of Wim, but he's doing it because his daughter's quite ill and she has a disease and he's raising money for the charity. And I'm like, well, at the behest of his cellular health, if he's trying to raise money for his daughter, who am I to say what his cause is or what his, purpose is in life? So yeah, beautiful point. I want to take the last 8 minutes. I want to open it to the roundtable, to the room, to anyone who has conversations. If you don't want to use your voice or speak your voice into the room, which all of you are facilitators, instructors, and coaches. And I feel like also this may be even a beautiful piece to push out onto the podcast so more women can get this no-cost education. But if there are things that you are wanting to know and things and experiences you want to share, please, by all means, now's the time. You can unmute yourself. You can throw a question or an insight into the chat, whatever feels good to you all. So I know you women are working out there. You men and women are working out there. Lots of humans working with a lot of human bodies in this landscape. What else are we seeing on social come up? We have the Andrew Huberman story. We have Dr. Thomas Seager. We have Mel Robbins and Dr. Stacy Sims. We have Suzanne Soberg. And even speaking to some of this, and I think this is not me I'm not trying to be controversial. She has an 11:57 rule based on her research, right? 11 minutes over the course of the week over multiple plunges to get 11 minutes in is the optimal. 57 minutes in a sauna over multiple sauna sessions in a week is the optimal for various different things. For sauna, it's all-cause mortality, and for cold plunging, it's optimal for people who want to get the benefits. But I want to say it's all based on her research and the pulls that she's put in. And so no one can tell me that 10 minutes or 12 minutes or 15 minutes in a week or 57 minutes versus an hour and a half in the sauna over the week. There is a little bit of an arbitrary nature there, right? When you look at a barbell in the gym and you have a plate on the end, it's why is it decided that the barbell starts 4 inches off the ground if that's how far the plate is pushing it off the ground? It's just because that's the size of the plate, right? So it's always knowing that we have to have discernment as coaches, always knowing that we have to have discernment for our own bodies as females, but also with the people we work with to have a little discernment to ask the question, why is that? Why am I doing 57 minutes to the exact T or 11 minutes? Why am I? Because here's what we all do. We all go out in the world. We hear these people on snippets of sound bites on Instagram, and then we go tell everybody that that's the truth. 11 minutes in the cold every week is optimal. And I'm a very firm believer and always want to be called out on this thing, which is if you run into someone who's absolutist in their thinking, that is not a person to follow, listen to, or learn from. Because we know that the science is always changing. We know that there's individuality at play. And absolutely, I don't think that Stacey was being absolutist. I think the soundbite is pulled a bit out of context. And also, she's allowed to have an effing opinion. You know what I mean? Like, she's allowed to be like, okay, this is what I think about time and temp for women, and this is why, right? There's conversations around. There's a faction of people that's like, go keto and get cold and you'll get pregnant. Like, there is a faction of people that uses those tools for those things. And all of this, when we blow out to this 10,000 foot view, all of this is really about how we navigate stress in our body, right? If fertility is coming when we clean up our diet and we learn how to navigate stress better, it makes sense if we become more fertile because the body is feeling more safe or more adapted to navigate challenging situations. And the safer the body feels, the more it's going to say, okay, ding, 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 Kristen, your body is ready to bring a child into this world and feed it. Not, we're in a war zone here. This is probably a time we're going to skip making the sperm and the egg go kablam and make a beautiful child. You know, it's just a whole, like, that was my sex talk from my mom. The sperm and the egg, they go kablam. But I want to just sort of stress all these points. And I want to know if you guys have any of the tough questions that are out there, anything that you're seeing that's just frustrating, including conversations across the social media landscape, because most of you I know, highly intelligent people who are making your own discerning opinions. And I see, you know, Kristen.
And are having beautiful success with clients and your own practices across the landscape. One thing I know that was mentioned in that podcast, one thing that she was talking about was that vasoconstriction versus vasodilation. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, was that women tend to vasoconstrict quicker.
Yeah. Yes, and right. What's the temp? What's the time? Yes, women can tend to vasoconstrict more quickly. And we also tend to be able to stay in longer in the AM part of the day without shivering. But we could stay in long at night and maybe we'll shiver a little more, or maybe it doesn't affect me at all in that way because my body is adapted or functions differently. So I think what Stacey's speaking about specifically is the medical physiological understanding of what is, as best as we can put a finger on it for science. Like if I say I breathe through my ears, that's just incorrect, right? So how do we make an understanding of what is in the range of correct and not be corrosive by saying that's wrong, but being a little bit more like, hey, what's another way we can look at that, right? And again, there has to be, we talk about this in feedback at the SHERPA level 1. Sometimes, like at some point I might have to say, we don't breathe through our ears. I'm sorry. That was a good guess, but you missed it, you know? Kristen, yes, you're here. Speak into the room.
Hi, how are you? I have been getting a lot more into like women's nervous system. I'm about to go through a somatic for the female nervous system training, and some of the things that I've been hearing just from maybe kind of more of like a nervous system healing perspective is that cold plunges could potentially be more dysregulating for certain people that are maybe like have had a lot of trauma in their lives and that are like previous or just like traumatized right like in this moment, you know, like they haven't dealt with a lot of that trauma, and then hopping into an ice bath can like further dysregulate you. So I'm just curious thoughts on that, because I obviously want to make it a safe practice for everyone. And I wouldn't want to put someone in a situation where an ice bath is going to be more dysregulating for them. So I'm just wondering if you ever come across that and how you would deal with that.
I think the first thing is we have any of the master trainers, we go through psychological first aid. It's a $50 course from Johns Hopkins. It's a bit dry, to be honest, but it's cheap and cheerful and quite educational to give some baseline understanding, which you may have some of that already, Kristen, but just for the general public, PFA, psychological first aid is a good thing to go through, both for yourself and others. The second thing is getting some education of either Peter Levine's work or somebody who can give you, there are plenty of people who are doing a baseline free course, like a short course or a short 1 hour video or something on understanding the nervous system and understanding trauma, right? So becoming trauma informed so that you understand what the word trauma is about and how it gets used in the landscape of psychology or nervous system or somatics. Then doing something like you're doing, becoming more trauma educated or perhaps even accredited at some point. And I'm in this trauma and somatics course with Will Reason. It's actually starting in May. And I am in a certification program working with a couple medical doctors around understanding trauma and somatics, part of the landscape from breath, cold, heat therapy, psychedelics, all of that, because there is a place where we could re-traumatize someone. That is very true, right? So we want to walk carefully through the door. We want to know what our what our agreement is with ourselves and with our clients. And this is not something you have to speak out loud to them, but about ethics, just how we're going to work with people, and that we err on the side of caution. I was on one of the certifications this morning where Mike Zeller, who I'm working with in the psychedelic space for understanding and working with people in that regard around trauma, was like, remember, you're a guide, you are not God. And that in some way to me is a very important notion to be mindful of, right? It's like giving service over ourselves, remembering that we're a guide here, remembering that we can interrupt somebody's process. And right at the moment that they could have this huge catalyst for change, if we are interruptive or we're going too long, too hard, we're using cold as a tool that's like, I want to do this breakthrough. Like we see this a lot in breath as well. Breakthrough breath work. It's like, Casper and I have these conversations about trauma porn where we see breath work or cold exposure online. And it's just like, everybody is like, it's like a whole fest of, outlandish or let's just say heightened nervous system state responses or over sexualized in some way when it comes to breath work and some of the advertising and screaming and crying and hollering and all of that is like, sometimes there are people who are sensitive in the world that just see those snippets on social that can get re-traumatized from that because it's triggering something, triggers some episode or something in them. So yeah, recognizing our own constraints is a very big piece of this when it comes to trauma. We could and probably should have a whole conversation next month on trauma. That feels like a great topic, Kristen, because it's a rabbit hole. But with women specifically in our nervous system, it's a very slippery slope to say that it's dramatically different because we have to look at the human. We have to look at the holistic body, what they've gone through in their lives, what their psychology is, how they have built coping mechanisms, what their attachment style is, and understand and begin what I'm assuming we'll do in this course, which is learn how to speak to that, whether that be energetically or verbally. Learning how to work with someone who's in a fight or flight state or in a heightened and raised state, and learning how to work with females and females specifically. And I don't even, this kind of goes for every human we work with. It's like erring on the side of safety. We're here to stretch people's comfort zones by 10%. Let's just put a number on it, not 90. And the places where we start to play with people in more re-traumatization, if you want to call it that, is when we stretch their comfort zone to 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, when we're pushing them too hard, right? And not understanding the person who's in front of us. So a first-time plunger, I'm going to treat very differently and much more on the err on the side of a lot of safety versus on the side of caution extremely with them, whereas someone I plunged 10 times and I know their parameters and boundaries, and even in the breath space and even in the hot space in the sauna. I'm going to just be walking slowly through that to create some balance. So creating an understanding of what your ethics are and what your agreement is yourself. It's almost like, a medical doctor does this, they sign an oath. It's like, what are the ways that you want to work with people? And then every single one of us should be at least psychologically first aid trained. And I would say trauma informed in the sense of there are courses out there at all different costs and all different with really great people. And I don't know the course that you're taking. I always recommend Will Reason because he's just such a prolific leader in the space, and his mom has worked 40 years in the space, and they work together, and I've had so many good experiences with him. But there are plenty of people out there. Irene Lyon is another great one. I think she has a free 3-part course that's like 20 minutes for each one that will give anyone on this call some education. Also put you in her funnel, but she sends great information out there. At the very least, going into Will's newsletter, and Will also has a $33 a month trauma-informed it's like a group call basically where he's covering a different topic. So he's actually educating every month for $33 is like second to none at traumaandsomatics.com. Yeah, and just being consistent, being reliable, and being as best you can, showing up as a safe harbor for people will help it be less potentiated, less re-traumatization or trauma coming up for people. And the one last thing I want to speak to specifically, because I know we hit the hour and people have to go. There is some discourse and conversation around the shaking in the tub. And I've had this conversation with Will from Trauma and Somatics specifically, and he and I would slightly disagree on this point. And I think Tom Seager is sort of in the mix in some way. And I have never heard Andrew's opinion on it, and our Lord Huberman. But, the shiver response in the tub, when it hits in the first 30 seconds, I'm hard pressed to think that that's cold response in the body. And some of the other things that come up from people's past experiences, i.e. someone who disassociates because they had water trauma when they were young, or somebody who takes longer to turn over. So turnover, this bliss point, this moment when the physiological response of the body, shunting blood to the core, there's a few physiological things happening, perhaps mammalian dive reflex is slowing the heart rate down at the same time that the mindset of the plunger is opening and saying, wow, I'm doing this hard thing. I'm actually doing the thing I didn't think I could do. And those two together creating this moment of surrender that we at SHERPA Breath and Cold call and continue to try to coin the phrase of the turnover. And this turnover, I've seen in some cases take longer with people who have had negative water experiences. I could go into further detail on that, but I don't want to. Other experiences that I've seen that are commonalities with people taking longer to the turnover. But you can imagine someone who had a near drowning experience might be more upregulated until they had a moment of being able to surrender and feel safe in the tub or in cold water. Secondarily, I really firmly believe that initial shiver can come from some sort of off-gassing of someone who's got some trauma that they're working through releasing. And it could just be as simple, without using the big T word, as someone having a really heightened emotional state or really stressful day, and then just having to let go of some of that in the cold initially in a way that feels somatically responded to me. And Will would say, Matt, jury's still out. And I would say, why is it happening then? And I think that's the question to be asked. And typically any other shiver that's happening after a minute and a half, when you get out of the tub specifically, or if someone's in the tub for, let's say, 4 minutes and they start to shiver, those things are going to be cold responses, right? That's appropriate. The body is trying to warm itself up. So I just gave you the rabbit hole of a feedback response, Kristen, to that. But I think all of those things are important to say when it comes to somatic understanding of the body. And these are things that I continue to learn as well by studying with the greatest people that I know in these spaces. Not to be left out is also the Condor approach with Tan Cole-Whitty. I've done their level 1 facilitator training. And it really talks about understanding the somatic body, understanding response, working with people with extra sensitivities. And backgrounds and cultures of all kinds. That, again, is another space. The last shout out is to say, you'll put all types of humans in the water, and they will all have different pronouns and different ways that they identify themselves. And just because someone is, when we speak about females in cold, it's typically physiological females in whatever package or iteration that human being beautifully comes in. There are some nuances to the way that they're born into this world genetically, and so chromosomally, and that is just important to know that that's what we're referring to, and why we have to sort of delineate, male versus female. That's why I use the word female more than the word woman. So yes, and amazing. I'm excited to hear more about what you are studying, and I really appreciate that question. It's beautiful.
I think one of the big things to just remember, and we talk about this all the time, and you've heard Christian say it a million times, it's something that I put in my head all the time, is not getting attached to the outcome. As we've talked about over this last hour plus, there's a myriad of different responses, a myriad of different ways people show up to the cold. And what we can do is focus on the context and on safety and on holding space. But we need to release ourselves from trying to control the outcome.
Yeah. So beautiful. It's so epic to have you all. I know we started with a bigger group and people are all heading out to their lives, and I'm going to release you all from that. But we will be dropping this recording into the SHERPA Pro portal. I feel pretty strongly about getting it more out to the world, and I have this podcast platform to share on. So pushing it to the Well Power podcast, you may be listening to that here. If anybody wants more information, I am always available. Biohacking.breath.cold, SHERPABreathandCold.com. Lena is at, tell them where you're at.
Limitless with Lena, spelled Lina, anytime. That's the easiest place to get a hold of me, or DM me there. That's at an Instagram. That's the best way to get a hold of me.
Yeah. So let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep social posting and sharing about this with other females and coaches in the space. This is about no-cost education at some level. I also have the certification program, which is level 1, which happens all over North America, that Lena and Parl and Mandy and all the people who are in and out of this call are co-leading some of those. And then there's a 9-month mentorship group. So if anyone wants to pop into that mentorship group, we talk about trauma, we talk deeply about these things, and it's available. Information is available on the SHERPA Breath and Cold website. So I will run with so much love out to you all. Breathe easy. Thank you so much, Lena, for spending this time with me. It's so epically important that we share. And stay cool, everyone.